You're lying flat on your back on the freezing concrete of your own driveway, arms stretched up behind the wheel arch, groping around for whatever you just dropped. A bolt, your kid's ball, doesn't matter what. And then your fingers land on something that absolutely should not be there. Something small, hard, slightly warm. It's stuck on, you realise, by a magnet, and you have to work it loose. You wriggle out from under the car and open your hand, and sitting in your palm is a little black box about the size of a matchbox with a dull green light pulsing on one edge. It takes a second for your brain to catch up, and then the ground tilts because you know exactly what you're holding. A tracker. Somebody has been following your every move. And your first instinct, the instinct nearly everyone has, is to do the obvious thing. Tear it off. Chuck it in the wheelie bin, slam the lid, pretend you never saw it. Get the horrible little thing out of your life and move on. It feels like the only sensible reaction. But here's what stops me every single time before I'd let you do that. Depending on who put that box there, dropping it in the bin could mean two completely different things. It could be you lawfully removing a stranger's property from your own vehicle, or it could be you destroying evidence in an active police investigation. And in this country, that's a criminal offence in its own right. The box gives you no clues either way. There's no label on it. And what you do in the next few minutes hinges on a question you cannot answer just by staring at it. Whose is it? And were they even allowed to put it there? So today I want to walk you through this properly, without the panic. Can the police legally plant a tracker on your car without a word to you? What tight rules do they actually have to follow if they do? How would you even recognise their work versus something far more sinister? And most importantly, are you actually allowed to rip that thing off and bin it? Or is that one impulsive move the exact thing that turns you from victim into suspect? Stick with me to the end, because there's one specific scenario where pulling that tracker and throwing it away lands you in a police interview room. Not for anything you did behind the wheel, but for what you did to the box itself. It's a trap almost nobody sees coming, and I'll show you precisely where that line sits. I'm Adam King. For 15 years, I represented people in police stations and courtrooms across England and Wales, and I've sat across the table from clients on both sides of this exact situation. People who were being lawfully watched and never had a clue, and people who found a device, panicked, smashed it, and handed the police an entirely new charge to bring against them. None of this is legal advice. It's the plain English version of what I wish every driver in this country understood about who's allowed to follow them and what to actually do on the day they find out somebody has. Let's start with the question that's crawling under your skin right now. Can the police genuinely attach something to your private car on your own driveway and track your movements without a warrant, through the letterbox, without a knock at the door, without ever letting you know? The honest answer, and you need to hear this straight, is yes, they can, but only inside a very specific set of constraints that most people have never even heard of, and never just because they feel like it. Here's the law in plain terms. Secretly tracking someone's movements like this falls under what's called directed surveillance, governed by the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, RIPA for short. But RIPA alone doesn't cover it, because to physically fit the device, they've had to interfere with your property, reach underneath your car and attach something to it. That pulls in a second, separate law, Part 3 of the Police Act 1997, covering interference with property. So a lawful police tracker isn't one decision, it's two separate authorizations, stacked on top of each other, and each one has to clear its own bar. It has to be necessary for something serious, like detecting serious crime. It has to be proportionate, meaning there wasn't a less invasive way to get the same result. And it has to be signed off, not by the officer who wants it, but by a senior authorizing officer, sometimes with independent sign-off on top of that. It's deliberately built to be difficult, precisely because it's such a serious intrusion, which means the frightening version and the reassuring version are both true simultaneously. Frightening because if you genuinely are the subject of a serious investigation, the state can and does watch your car without telling you, and they're entitled to. Reassuring because they can't simply do this to you because an officer didn't like your attitude at a traffic stop. There has to be a documented, serious reason behind it, one that's authorized and can be reviewed later. That's the boundary, and understanding that boundary exists is what separates genuine caution from pure paranoia. And this isn't a black box nobody ever opens. These covert powers sit under independent oversight, a commissioner and inspectors whose entire job is to go back through the authorizations police grant themselves and ask whether they were truly necessary, truly proportionate, and properly documented. It's far from flawless, and I won't pretend otherwise, but the picture painted by a lot of American content, an officer just deciding on a whim to follow you indefinitely, isn't how this works here. Every authorization is a document that someone senior has to sign and that someone independent can later pull apart. So let me knock down 2 myths quickly, because I hear them constantly, and they're what get people into real trouble. Myth 1. They'd have to hand me a warrant before putting a tracker on my car. No, this isn't a search warrant shown to you at the front door. It's an internal authorization under RIPA and the Police Act, granted quietly, and you're not meant to know it exists while it's active. Sitting around waiting for a warrant that's never coming is a complete misunderstanding of how this works. Myth 2, and this is the dangerous one, if it's not the police, I'll just track down who did it and sue them. You might well have a case, I'll get to that, but you don't build that case by destroying the one piece of evidence proving it ever happened. The device is your proof. Smash it, and you throw your own case away with it. Now, to be fair, and I try to always be fair because it keeps this honest, the entire point of these powers is to catch the people the rest of us genuinely want caught. Organised crime, trafficking, the serious end of things. Most people watching this will never have a lawful police tracker anywhere near their car because they've done nothing to warrant one. So if this has you wanting to check under your bumper tonight, take a breath. The far more common story isn't the police at all, and that fork in the road is the thing you need to understand before you touch that device. Because here's what a lot of that American content skips right past. Not every tracker is the police. In fact, most of them aren't. That little box under your car is far more likely to have been placed there by a person than by the state. And that changes everything, including how much danger you might genuinely be in. A jealous partner, an ex who can't let go, a business rival, someone in the middle of a bitter separation who wants to know exactly where you go. And when a private individual covertly tracks someone else's movements like that, they're very often breaking the law themselves, a serious breach of data protection rules, and depending on the pattern behind it, it can tip into harassment or stalking under the Protection from Harassment Act 1997. Those aren't minor offences. Stalking is a criminal charge that puts people behind bars, and covert tracking shows up in some of the most dangerous stalking cases on record. And the law gives you more than one avenue to fight back against a private tracker, which is exactly why you preserve the evidence instead of destroying it. On the criminal side, there's harassment and stalking. On the data protection side, secretly logging everywhere a person goes counts as unlawful processing of their personal data, and that can be reported. And on the civil side, you may have genuine claims for harassment, for breach of your privacy, and for something the law rather charmingly calls trespass to goods, simply interfering with your property without permission, which is exactly what bolting a device to your car amounts to. People have pursued exactly these routes and won protection. Injunctions ordering someone to stop, orders keeping them away entirely. But every one of those routes depends on proof. That little box, photographed while it's still in place and intact, is the proof. From the moment you find it, it's the single most important thing you own. which is precisely why your instinct to bin it is the wrong call. So the same little box can mean two entirely different things. If it's the police, you're inside a lawful, regulated process, and the device is potentially evidence. If it's a private individual, you might be the target of a crime, and the device is potentially evidence of that too. In both worlds, the worst possible move is the one your gut is screaming at you to make, ripping it off and destroying it. Hold on to that thought, because it's the entire reason for this video. But first, how would you even spot one? Part of the fear here is simply not knowing. Honestly, most people find these by accident, exactly the way I described. Cleaning the car, changing a tire, reaching for something that rolled underneath. They tend to be tucked where metal meets shadow, inside the rear bumper, up in a wheel arch, underneath the chassis, sometimes magnetized into the wheel well. A giveaway is a small box that doesn't match anything else under there, often with its own separate battery pack, sometimes faintly warm, occasionally with a tiny light. If you have a genuine, specific reason to suspect you're being tracked, a stalker, an abusive ex who always somehow knows where you've been, you can have the car professionally swept. And if there's a real safety concern, that's a conversation for the police, not a mystery to solve alone at midnight with a torch. Step back for a second and look at the bigger picture, because it puts all of this in context. We already live under more everyday surveillance than any generation before us. Your number plate gets read and logged by ANPR cameras thousands of times a year, on motorways, in car parks, on ordinary high streets, quietly building a map of everywhere your car goes. A covert tracker is just the sharpest, most personal end of that same spectrum. The difference between being one plate among millions in a database and being the specific person somebody chose to follow is what makes this hit differently than a parking ticket ever could. It isn't really about the little box. It's the creeping sense that you could be watched. And the sensible, grown-up response to that isn't panic, and it isn't paranoia. It's knowing exactly where the law draws the line between what they're allowed to do to you and what they're not. That knowledge is what puts you back in control on your own driveway. And it's exactly why I've put together a short, plain English guide, the Know Your Rights Handbook. It walks through the everyday situations most of us will genuinely encounter, at the roadside, at your front door, and in moments exactly like this one. It gives you calm, practical steps and the actual law behind them, so you're not making major decisions in the middle of the night purely on instinct. I won't push it further than that. If this has been useful, the link's in the description, and that's all I'll say about it. Now, the question you actually came here for, and the trap I promised you. You found the box. Can you legally take it off and throw it away? Here's where I have to be precise, because the honest answer is it depends entirely on who put it there and why, which is usually the one thing you can't be sure of in the moment. Let's start with the general rule, because it's on your side more often than not. It's your car. If you own it outright and something has been attached to it without your knowledge or consent, you're generally entitled to remove that object from your own property. Removing it isn't, by itself, a crime. So, in the most common scenario, a private tracker fitted by someone with no right to fit it, taking it off your vehicle is usually perfectly lawful. But now walk right up to the edge of that rule, because this is the sting in the tail. Everything changes the moment the device is something you're not actually free to interfere with. If your car is on finance or lease, there may be a tracker in there that you agreed to somewhere in the small print, and ripping it out could breach that agreement. If a court has issued an order in a case you're involved in, that can shift your obligations too. And the big one, if that box is a lawfully authorized police device, part of an active investigation, then it isn't just an annoyance you're clearing off, it's evidence. Destroying it, smashing it, binning it once you know or suspect what it is can expose you to a charge of criminal damage to police property, and far more seriously, to obstructing or even perverting the course of justice. Think about how that looks from the outside. You've taken the one piece of equipment in a serious investigation and deliberately destroyed it. That isn't the behaviour of an innocent person clearing junk off their car. That's potentially a brand new offence, and it's the one that can actually land you in the interview room. That's the trap. Not the tracking itself, the binning. So, how do you stay on the right side of every version of this when you genuinely can't tell which one you're in? You do the calm thing instead of the instinctive thing. Here's the move. The equivalent, for this situation, of the one steady line I always give people during a police stop. Don't smash it, and don't hurl it into the bin the second you find it. First, leave it exactly where it is and photograph it. Where it's fitted, how it's attached, the condition it's in. Because that little box is potentially evidence, and evidence protects you no matter which world you're standing in. Second, note down the date and time you found it, and take a hard, honest moment to think about who in your life might want to know your movements. An ex, a dispute, some kind of reason. Third, if any part of you fears a stalker, an abusive former partner, someone who genuinely frightens you, this stops being a puzzle and becomes a safety issue. Contact the police and tell them plainly, because covert tracking is exactly the kind of evidence they take seriously in cases like that. And fourth, if it isn't a safety emergency and you simply want the thing gone lawfully, get 5 minutes of proper advice before you destroy anything. Because whose device it is changes what you're actually allowed to do with it, and a solicitor or the police can tell you which situation you're standing in. Photograph it, note it, assess the danger, get advice. That's the order to follow. Learn it the way you know your own number plate, because on the day you actually need it, your hands will be shaking. Let me make this real with two people, because I've seen both play out. The first man finds the box, feels the violation of it, and does exactly what his gut is telling him to do. Hurls it onto the concrete, stamps on it, puts it out with the recycling, and tells himself he's taken his privacy back. But it turns out to have been a lawfully authorized device in an active investigation. Now, on top of everything else, he's answering questions about criminal damage and interference with an investigation. Questions he created for himself in 10 furious seconds over a box he could simply have left alone. The second woman finds an identical box in an identical panic, but she stops. She photographs it, leaves it attached, writes down the date, and admits to herself who it's probably from. An ex who's been turning up in places he had no way of knowing she'd be. She hands it to the police as evidence of exactly that, and it becomes part of the case that finally gets her an order keeping him away. Same box, same fear. One of them destroyed the truth. The other used it. That difference is the entire point of this video. Let me play out the calm version for you, so you can actually hear how it sounds. You find the box under the wheel arch. Your heart's racing, but instead of flinging it across the drive, you leave it attached and take 4 or 5 clear photos on your phone. You slide out from under the car, you write down the date, and you sit with it for a moment, honestly asking yourself whether anyone in your life has both the reason and the temperament to do this. If the answer scares you, you call the police and say, "I found a tracking device fitted to my car, and I'm concerned about my safety." If it doesn't scare you, you still don't destroy it. You take it to someone who can tell you for certain whether you're free to bin it or whether it's something you mustn't touch. 10 minutes of patience, and you've protected yourself in every direction at once, instead of 10 seconds of instinct that could have handed someone a case against you. And if some small voice is telling you this could never happen to you, that trackers are for gangsters and soap operas, sit with the private side of this for a moment. You don't need to be a criminal to end up tracked. You just need an ex who won't accept it's over, a partner who's turned controlling, a messy separation with money or children involved, a neighbour or colleague with a grudge and £40 to spend online. Those aren't rare lives. They're ordinary ones. and the device that ends up under an ordinary car is almost always about private obsession, not a police operation. That's what makes this worth 10 minutes of your time, even if you've never had so much as a parking fine. So, let's bring it all together. Yes, the police can lawfully track your car in secret, but only under RIPA and the Police Act, only when it's necessary and proportionate, only once a senior officer has signed off on it, and almost never against someone who's given them no reason to. But the box under your bumper is far more likely to belong to a person than to the police, and if it does, you may be the target of a crime, not the subject of one. Whichever it turns out to be, the single worst move is the one every instinct is demanding: destroying it. Photograph it, note it, judge whether you're in danger, get advice before you bin it, because removing a stranger's device from your own car is usually lawful, but destroying evidence in a live investigation is a crime. And from the outside, you can never be entirely sure which box you're holding. If this helped you, do two things for me. Take a look at the pinned rights card in the description so this whole sequence is in your back pocket before you ever find yourself on that driveway. And subscribe, because I break down exactly this kind of thing every week in plain English, so that if it's ever you holding that little black box, you already understand the situation better than the person who put it there. I'm Adam King. Stay calm, don't destroy the evidence, and I'll see you in the next one.